2023 has been altogether a fantastic year for gaming. We have had some heavy hitters across the single player and the multiplayer realm, CRPGs having a AAA champion to bring them into the limelight that is Baldur's Gate 3, Battlefield 3 and 4 having its glory days return in the guise of a low poly based game known as BattleBit Remastered, two absolutely fantastic horror remakes of Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, and Lethal Company being a new co-op horror experience that everyone seems to be really enjoying. It's been the gift that keeps on giving so far, with many genres getting their flowers, on top of more good shooters and community-based projects to come. Here I've got a list of games that I've been eyeing out for some time. Some you may know, some you may not know, and the further you dig, the more projects under the surface that you'll find. Some of them can't be played yet and may not see a release anytime soon, but they show so much potential that I should bring them to your attention, as more word spread of a game always helps. I've got about 9 games here. Some of them already have a prototype or a demo that you can try, but some of them don't. So if the project interests you, it's best to keep tabs on them until they do. Either way, I'll put links for each one in the description. Now that that's out of the way, I'll start with the first one. Number 1, Leaden Sky 2. So this is a sequel project based on its 2D predecessor. Seeing it the first time reminded me of some of the Flash games that had a decent amount of detail put into them and were fun to play. The sequel, however, makes a full transition into 3D, which was something that the developer originally wanted to do in the first place, but didn't have the skills at the time to do it. What's available now is a prototype with placeholder assets to further realize the game's vision. But recently, a 2023 teaser of the game shows a more updated version, showing a lot more promise this time around. Personally, I'm a sucker for these type of games with dark color palettes and rooms ripped out of a 2000s horror movie. The game has that similar vibe, which has me interested in it. It may not look like much at the moment, but whenever I see projects with a early 3D look, more specifically the mid-2000s period, I always keep my tabs on those games. For those that are interested, I'll also provide a link to the first game that is in a demo phase still, but is still an enjoyable experience if you're in the market with a 6th gen inspired approach, which you will get from the second one, whereas if you want the 2D counterpart, the first one will do the job. Number 2, Transience. Thanks to the existence of tactical-based shooters like Ground Breach, 0 Hour, and Ready or Not, we've seen a true return to form where every action has a consequence and needs to be taken slow, thus the term tactical shooters. Transience is another game that throws its hat in the ringer, being developed by Big Fry TV and the studio making it. What makes this one more distinctive for me was the near-future setting that it's going for. We don't often get realistic sci-fi tactical shooters in the same vein as something like Ready or Not. Transience, however, goes for something distant but not so far away, while still making room for more futurism. It's the best compromise for those that prefer the modern setting and those that like sci-fi settings. It has a customization system similar to Blacklight Retribution, where you could take a weapon and fundamentally change it in every aspect, like turning an SMG into a sniper rifle or a sniper rifle into a shotgun. At least, that was the impression I had based on the description of its customization system. It combines both stealth and tactical-based gameplay, and I generally prefer the latter, so more shooting for me and less sneaking. You can try out the demo on Steam, and the Big Fry channel is very active on the project and is looking for ways to make the game much better than it already is. Always happy to see more tactical shooters out there. Number 3, Half Sword. With so many games flooding the scene and not having enough time for all of them, some games fall under the cracks. For me, it's the physics-based games. They're generally the type of games that have a sandbox nature to them, where the player's curiosity is the driving force for these type of games. Half Sword looks to do the same thing, but coats it in a setting based around 15th century medieval combat, where you use the movement of your mouse to strike the final blow, leaving a gory mess of your opponent, or the opposite towards you if you screw up. A lot of the times it looks like 2 drunk people in a pub having a go because one of them turned the schooner upside down. The physics-based aspect brings the magic into the game though, where it really feels like 2 people desperately trying to kill each other, rather than relying on choreographed animations made in Blender. In saying that though, physics-based games can be somewhat janky, which is why you don't see it in a lot of other games like say Chivalry or For Honor, but the random and bloody combat in medieval settings is fitting for ragdoll physics to play out, making for a lot of funny moments that can randomly come about. This is just one of many, and it's a rabbit hole you'll never want to leave once you start flailing about. There is currently a demo that you can play on Steam, but it will take some time for it to develop further, but so far it looks really promising and I can't wait to see its final release. Number 4, En Tuk, a mod for Doom 2. The classic Doom modding time and time again has always surprised me in many ways, and some projects have even been better than a lot of other games that I've played. This one in particular is essentially a Doom Eternal demake for Doom 2, made by the same person that did Death Foretold, a Doom 2016 demake for Doom 2, and Quake Champions Doom Edition. If you're a fan of Doom Eternal, then this is an absolute treat. But at the moment, it's a cock tease, because as far as I know, you can't play it just yet. Even still, it looks really well done. Has all the weapons and mods, Blood Punch, the grenades, everything has been overhauled to mimic the Doom Eternal experience, but in Doom 2. Stuff like this is why the classic Doom games are still played today, and why out of all of the Doom games, Doom 2 is the one that I've played the most. I hope that this project does continue to see further development, because the other mods that the developer has worked on are absolutely fantastic and should be checked out. I'll also put a link for his page on ModDB in the description. Number 5, Night Runners. Racing games are something close to my heart. They were my first love before shooters ever came into the fray, and Night Runners looks to be a game reminiscent of the past, quite literally as it coats itself in the 90s and 2000s period, in the guise of JDMs racing on the expressways. If you've ever played the Tokyo Extreme Racer games, then this game is similar in spirit. This is probably the racing game that I'm excited for the most currently, because it houses some of my favorite cars, it has the atmosphere of Night City racing in Japan, as well as the 6th gen vibes that I get from it altogether. Racing games nowadays, at least in the mainstream department, usually goes with either a sim arcade racer build or a full-on sim racer build. But the indie scene and games like this show that games don't have to always be realistic to be fun. They just have to have a fun driving model that makes driving enjoyable. It's why people like Trackmania or Burnout or Midnight Club or the older Need for Speed games. Night Runners is supposedly having a demo released towards the end of the year, but people that have subscribed to the developer's Patreon can get access to the game in its current state. Either way, I hope to be able to play it one day. Number 6, Half-Life Reamped. Like Doom, Half-Life has a huge modding community, and some projects like Counter-Strike changed the trajectory of multiplayer shooters in the 2000s, opting for slow and methodical gameplay instead of fast-paced arena shooters like Quake. Speaking of which, what if Half-Life took the same idea as Doom and made Dr. Freeman into an alternate Doom-slaying version of himself, coming to Earth and seeing the whole place gone to shit? What this means is lots of fast-paced movement, verticality, heavy music, and large arenas to strut about in. It's also got the magic of the Source engine, which is my personal favorite engine still. And if you own copies of the Half-Life games, you can already access some genuinely amazing projects that stand out on their own. Half-Life Reamped is such a cool concept because it takes my favorite shooter franchise, Doom, and actually creates an alternate version of Half-Life's universe with Doom mixed into it, making for a more unique version of Half-Life altogether. As for the state of it currently, it's still in development. Hopefully anyway. But last I checked, videos were still being uploaded on the developer's channel, so I'm assuming that it's still being worked on in the background. The thing with projects like this ambitious mind you, and modding in general, is that they take a lot of work, especially when you're soloing the project and have lots of hats to wear. Sometimes the projects never even reach a playable state. I hope that this one isn't one of them and I get to play it. Number 7, Raw Metal. I'm not really a fan of stealth games if I'm being honest. I've had exceptions in the past, but I've always generally preferred being in the enemy's face and fighting them head on. That's where the beat 'em up part in this game comes in. This game seems to be a combination of games like Metal Gear Solid with the stealth-based gameplay, and then you go into Sifu mode when you're forced into combat. The fights themselves look really challenging, forcing you to utilize your environment, as well as flurrying up combos to have a fighting chance. The stealth gameplay, however, seems to encourage you to avoid fights most of the time, so that when you fight the bosses, you have more health to rely on in case you make mistakes. It seems to be a game about you picking your fights rather than getting into every single one. The minimalistic presentation is also another highlight of the game. It may risk getting more repetitive visually over time because of it being set in a large mining labyrinth, but that could change if the player gets exposed to more dynamic scenery while still keeping the same tone intact. It's always refreshing to have more hand-to-hand centric games come about and shake things up in action games, and sometimes you feel more of a badass when you wipe out a whole squad with nothing but your hands and feet. There's a demo for it on Steam if you want to try it out, and it looks really good so far. I cannot wait to see its full release. Number 8, Out of Action. Now, I love gun fu games, especially ones like Trepang 2 and Maximum Action. Out of Action looks to be a game that brings a similar feeling, but in a dark cyberpunk setting with stylized 3D visuals that has a toon-shaded look to it. The game's movement, however, is similar to the two games that I already mentioned, but with a lot more refinement to try and make it the most stylish gunfu experience out there. The environments, weapons, and human models look great, and the tone is consistent thanks to the choice of dark colors permeated in the game's setting. The developer is frequently uploading work-in-progress videos showing its current state and is always applying fixes or changes to existing assets and mechanics in the game. The game looks to have a lot going for it, with single-player and multiplayer content fused into it, a server browser, and also offline play being available later on. The game is fast-paced without it being too overwhelming like what you would see in other arena shooters. It seems like you have enough space in the maps to get comfortable with your movement before getting right into the action. For the present moment though, you can't play it just yet, but development seems to be active and there are always videos of the game being put up, so I have good faith that the project will see the light of day. Number 9. Butcher's Creek. Now this game, unfortunately, I can't get any footage of. For the time being, there are really only just a few images available. For those that don't know, it's a project being made by David Szymanski, the same guy who did Dusk, Iron Lung, Chopped Goblins, and the recent Squirrel Stapler. This game, according to the page, seems to be inspired by Condemned Criminal Origins, which is my favorite horror game of all time. My interest immediately peaked when I saw this. When I think about it, there really isn't anything at all like that game, and if there is, I sure as shit have not heard about it yet. But the tone and setting based on the images seem really spot on with trying to replicate Condemned Criminal Origins' atmosphere, the dark and grimy rooms, the rundown departments, the cabins and homes that haven't been touched in a million years, as well as the psychotic human enemies that you fight along the way, with brutal melee combat. I would be astronomically disappointed if this project ended up getting cancelled because I've always wanted more games like Condemned. I gave up on getting a third Condemned game a long time ago, and if this project goes through, then I will be more than content. And David is one of the most consistent indie horror developers out there. Plus, we'll be getting the HD edition for Dusk in December, as well as workshop support for it as well. About time. Fingers crossed for this one. And that's about it for now. There are a metric ton of other projects that I'm excited for, some I may have even forgotten about but will remember eventually. Gaming nowadays is a never-ending waterfall where some turds make their way in, and in between all of that are all the unique and interesting projects that come along and surprise us. Some projects may not ever get finished and some may make it. But either way, we always have something to look forward to in this case. Now for the foreseeable future, I will still upload whenever I can, but I'll still be spending time doing other things, doing more 3D modeling and pixel art, making music again now that I finally have a guitar to use, as well as doing more game dev stuff. But I still want to cover more games or game topics, as well as finding other interesting game projects that haven't been covered. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.